Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril, and today we are painting up a Feral Uruk Hai, the fierce, brutish allies of the Uruk Hai scouts led by Lurtz and the Uruk Hai in pursuit of the Fellowship into Amon Hen, preceding the death of poor Boromir. As always, we mould line cleaned and filed down our model to get rid of any mould lines and trimmed the model of any flash. We then affixed the model to the slaughter base using superglue. Once this was done, we covered the base with fine modelling sand, and once this was dry, we undercoated with Citadel Chaos Black spray. These models are a great addition to any Scout Uruk Hai force, and en masse can look really intimidating and really strike fear into the heart of any who face them on the tabletop. We hope you enjoy the video, guys. Without further ado, please sit back, relax, and enjoy. First, we're going to use a mix of Doomball Brown, Corn Red, and Abaddon Black to apply the base coat for the Uruk Hai skin. Make sure we get in all the crooks and crevices, all around his torso, around the neck, under all the arms, and just get a nice smooth coverage over all the exposed flesh on this model. Now we're going to use a mix of Iron Warriors and Abaddon Black, and we're going to very carefully just base coat all the armour plating on this model. There's not an awful lot of armour on this model, mainly around the head, the shoulders, and the blades of the sword. We're not going to be picking out the rings and piercings on him at this point. Now we're going to use Thundia Brown, and we're going to base coat all the cloth hanging down his midsection. Now we're going to tone down the flesh with a diluted wash of Agrak Thirshade. And apply this fairly liberally all over the model and make sure it gets in all the grooves and recesses across all the muscular detail. And try and avoid it pooling because we want the flesh to look as natural, whilst also looking unnatural as it's an Uruk, as we possibly can. Now we're going to start layering up the flesh by adding Tuscarl fur to the original base coat mix, leaving the Agrak Thirshade wash showing in the deepest recesses, defining areas such as his six-pack, his pecs, all the musculature across the arms, separating out the fingers and defining the legs. This will just help create a really nice solid base to all the muscle and all the definition on this skin for the following layering and highlighting stages. We're going to continue to add Tuscarl fur to the original base coat mix until we reach an approximate 75% Tuscarl fur, 25% the original Doomball, Corn and Abaddon mix. Each time we apply this layer, we're going to be focusing on keeping our highlights tighter and thinner and pushing these towards the edges and most upper raised of musculature to create a nice smooth transition between the darker areas of skin and the lighter areas. Once you're happy with how the skin looks after the layering stages, we're going to apply the first highlight now with pure Tuscarl fur and just further define these areas by keeping our highlights as tight and thin as we can and focusing on more of the upper and raised detail than we have previously. This will just further accentuate that transition between the recessed musculature and the uppermost raised areas of flesh. Once you're happy with how the penultimate highlight stage is looking, we're going to apply a final edge highlight to the most upper areas and most pronounced areas of skin with a mix of tusk or fur and deepkin flesh. We don't want to overwhelm the look of the skin we've got so far by making this too bright and vibrant, so just focus on picking out the most pronounced details here. Once you're happy with how this looks, we're now going to apply a very light glaze with some seriously thinned down Reikland flesh shade just to tie all these stages together. We're going to carefully now pick out the recessed eye sockets with 2 small lines of Abaddon black, followed by 2 small dots of padded witch flesh either side just to create the eyes. And finally we're going to use Rakarth flesh and just very carefully pick out his gnarly Uruk teeth. Now that we've finished the skin, we can go back over and we can carefully pick out all the ringed piercings over the model with lead belcher. Being very careful not to bleed out onto any of the finished skin with this metallic paint. Now we're going to use a mix of Athonian Camo Shade and Agrax Earth Shade, thinned down about 50% with Lamia Medium and apply an all over wash to all the metalwork. This will just help give it that nice toned dirty look that we want from the Uruk Hai armour. Once this is dry, we're now going to use pure Nuln oil without any thinning and apply this once again all over the armour plating. This will just dull it down and give it the really dark look that we see from the films. Now we're going to use lead belcher mixed with a little bit of pallid witch flesh, and with a very fine point to your brush and taking your time, apply an extreme edge highlight to all the edges of all the armour plating, the sharp and most pronounced edges of the sword, and picking out the curves of all the piercings. Now we're going to apply a little bit of battle damage to the armour plating surfaces with Stormhose Silver, keeping this in very light, almost feather light brush strokes, just sporadically around some of the bigger areas of metalwork, just to create that look of scratch marks as he's been fighting in battle. Now we're going to use a mix of Mournfang Brown and Rhinox Hide, and we're going to separate out some of the cloth from the Thondria Brown base coat we applied earlier, just to create a little bit of differentiation across the cloth areas, to make it a little bit more visually appealing. At this point we're also going to pick out the sandals and the hilts of both swords. Now we're going to apply a wash to all the cloth, sword and sandal areas with a slightly diluted wash of Agrax Earthshade. Now we're going to apply a layer stage using a Thondria Brown and Baneblade Brown mix. We're going to focus this on the Thondria Brown base coated areas we applied earlier, and just focus on applying this as the first layer, leaving the Agrax Earthshade showing in the recesses to create a sense of movement across the material. You're going to keep adding Baneblade Brown to this mix, and at every stage, like we did the skin, keep your highlights tighter, thinner, and focus more on the upper and raised areas to really accentuate that sense of movement across the material. Now we're going to apply a very fine edge highlight to all the upper areas of this cloth with pure Baneblade brown. With the other areas of cloth, we're going to start adding some Deathclaw Brown to the Mournfang Rhinox Hide base mix, and again, just apply this as the first initial layer all over these cloth areas. Making sure we get in and separate out the ridges in all the sword hilts, and defining the straps of the sandals and soles of the feet as well. As we say, this will just help to create a little bit of differentiation between the two areas of brown cloth and make the model look a little bit more visually interesting on the table. Apply this in a couple of stages. By the time you're finished before the final highlight stage, your mix should contain no more than 50% Deathclaw Brown as it does here. Finally, we're going to apply an edge highlight with pure Deathclaw Brown, just picking out the upper folds of all the cloth areas, as well as just defining the edges of the hilts and the very edges of the straps of the sandals. Now we're going to apply a glaze to all these cloth areas with a 50-50 mix of Seraphim Sepia and Lamia Medium. Once again, this will just help to tone down and give it a slightly more leathery look, and also tie in all the layering and highlighting stages. We're going to apply a base coat of Storm Vermin Fur and Rhinox Hide to the hair down the back of his head. Now we're going to apply a wash with a 50-50 mix of non-oil and Lamia Medium, making sure this is nice and targeted to avoid any leakage onto the rest of the model. Once the wash is dry, we're going to use pure Storm Vermin Fur and pick out some of the larger areas of this long, gangly Uruk hair. And finally, we're going to use a mix of Storm Vermin Fur and Administratum Grey and apply this as an edge highlight just to the uppermost areas of the hair. We're going to paint the skull that hangs down the back of his waist with Rakarth flesh. Then we're going to give this a subsequent wash with a 50-50 mix of Agrak Thurshade and Lamia Medium. Once this is dry, we can use a mix of Rakarth flesh and Ushabti bone just to define the features of the skull, leaving the Agrak Thurshade wash showing in the deepest recesses. And finally, we're going to apply an edge highlight with pure pallid witch flesh, just to frame the most prominent details of the bone. The hair and beard still attached to the skull was painted with Rhinox hide. This was then highlighted very carefully with pure Gorthor brown. We're going to very carefully apply some Blood for the Blood God technical paint just around the piercings, just to give them that red sore look. Finally, we're going to apply the freehand white hand across the torso. You can do this in a couple of ways, but we found the best way is to paint a thick C on the model to form the base of the hand with a slightly elongated bottom half, and then draw the fingers up, down, and the thumb out from the right hand side as you see fit. Once you're happy with your placement of these hands, we're going to go over the Rakarth flesh now with Pallid Witch flesh, leaving the Rakarth flesh showing as much as we can just on the very outsides of all these details. The sand on the base was painted in a 3-stage dry brush, starting with Dryad Bark, followed with a lighter dry brush over the top with Gorthor Brown, and finally finished with a very light feather dusting of Pallid Witch flesh. We then affix some grass tufts, some dead leaves and clump foliage to the base to best represent the environment he's running through. Finally, the rim of the base was painted with pure Dryad Bark. And there you have it, our fierce Feral Uruk Hai ready to help pursue the Fellowship into Amon Hen in pursuit of the One Ring for his master Sauron.